If you have a Bible, go ahead and turn to Acts chapter 4. And we have been in this series, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Anyway, also, just so you know, we put these little things up. We need this one blocked off, but we figured for symmetry, we'd do this one too, all right? But our choir is using that today, all right, with some stuff they're doing. So anyway, but we've been in this series, and I just want you to catch this. Because, you know, most of the time I talk to you about who he's called us to be, right? Because as I've shared with you many times, it's much more important that you are who you're supposed to be than that you do what you're supposed to do. But also, too, there is, in spite of that, there is an understanding that you and I need to see is that he is share with us. We do have a task. We do have a reason to exist together. We're not just lone rangers and lone wolves, right, as believers. He's called us to band together. That's why he said a city on the hill can't be hidden. Therefore, it's not one person, it's a whole lot of people. And so that becomes this great picture of not just who we're supposed to be, but what we're supposed to be doing. And I just want to kind of talk to you about that today. Just want to kind of share pretty straightforward and just share with you a couple of sets of verses. And today's title is Being on Task, all right? Being on task. When I was growing up, when I went to elementary school, right? It was different than it is today, you know? You didn't get a gold star for everything. It just was an amazing time. And in fact, you never got a gold star for anything. And if anybody ever called your parents, it was always bad. Okay, there was never anything good. And so, but I remember report card, right? I remember report card. And you open it up, front part had your name, and inside had all the grades. But then on the back of the report card, there was this list. I don't even know if they still do this, right? There was this list of all kinds of stuff, plays well with others, that kind of stuff. And then there was another one, right? And the ones I remember, okay, are the ones that I got the little check marks by. All right, check mark means you need improvement, all right, is what it means, all right? And there was one on the back that I struggled with, and it was called Stays on Task, all right? And guys, because I've already told you, I had ADD back before they knew even what it was, right? Does that make sense? And so stays on task, because I got bored easily. And staying on task, being on task. I've told you many times that as his, if we are his today, this is not only something we want to do, but we want to be a part of. That's why I've really enjoyed this time, because I know that everybody that is truly his, you're interested in what I'm talking about. We were putting together just some of our new stuff. I had them put it in the bulletin today, right? And so you can see kind of our statement, our vision statement in reality, the structure of it hasn't changed, just the wording has, because, God's word's God's word, his truth is his truth, and it is what it is. But we basically put it this way, right? We put it this way, is that if you take a look at it, if you want to take a look at it in here, it just basically says doing whatever it takes, right? Hence the t-shirts, right? Hence just everything we have around us. Because I have found that, I love that phrase, whatever it takes. I've catch myself saying it often around here. And so that's why it caught on. And that's why it makes it in here. Because when you say whatever it takes, that usually means that I'm all in here, whatever it takes. When a doctor says that your child needs a whatever it is, but the doctor says, but it's going to cost, you say, I don't care what it costs. Are you hearing me? Whatever it takes. Whatever, because if something's that important to you, you're willing to be all in on it. Well, that's why I love the phrase, right? And I catch myself saying it often. So therefore, we're doing whatever it takes to help all people of all ages understand the life-changing message of the scriptures. So basically, the thought is sharing is what we're supposed to be doing. Letting that be known. And so we kind of come up with this thought and just call the whole fall this, right? Whatever it takes. And being on task is basically what we've been doing just in different increments, right? At the very first week, we talked about that Jesus made the statement is that follow me and I will make you fishers of men, right? So it's something that he is working in you. And what that means is that doesn't mean that you're going to catch, you're just supposed to fish. Therefore, we talked about just a couple of weeks ago, I believe, a parable Jesus told about the sower and the soils. And the soils represents people's hearts. The seed represents his word. And then the sower just scatters the seed. Well, that's us, right? We just throw the seed, right? Because all of what's needed is inside the seed. So it's a cool picture of what it means to just share. Therefore, our responsibility is just to share. Now, I don't know why God has done it that way. People ask me, why do you think God did it that way? And as if I have an answer, right? Because I'm not him, and you wouldn't want me to be him. So, you know what I'm saying? I don't know why he set it up, but he set it up in a way that it's essential. Right? Why? Because you can't come to know Christ meditating under a tree. Right? You don't get enlightened and become a believer. No, you have to hear his word, right? Faith comes by hearing him by his word. You got to know what to believe, and just blind faith is not what we're looking at, It's like people say, well, you just got to believe. It doesn't matter what you believe, as long as you believe, then that's nonsense, right? Therefore, belief is based on truth, on facts, right? Belief is neither good nor bad, but it can be good or bad. Faith in the wrong thing can bring huge problems in your life. So, I don't know, it's an interesting thing for you to see and to hear and understand. And so I just want to share with you just a little bit more today of what that looks like. Because when you break it all down to our responsibility is just to make it understandable. And that's my passion, is that I spend a lot of time sharing with people who are believers, right? I share with them a lot of who God's called us to be. But even then, we find out that it's his work in us and that kind of thing. But this part's different. This is not as difficult as you think. It's basically sharing with people. Therefore, you're depending on him to work, right? Therefore, right, if the mailman comes by and says and gives you a letter, and it's the sweepstakes, and you've won the sweepstakes, I don't know, $5,000 a week for the rest of your life or whatever it is. All right, you may hug the mailman, but he had very little to do with it. Does that make sense? Right, he just brought you the what? The good news, right? That's who you and I are to be. We may get credit for what God does, but in reality, we do very little other than just make sure people understand. Why has God done it that? I don't know, but he has entrusted us with the responsibility to make sure that people understand. And that is who he's called us to be. Therefore, we've been praying for people in our lives because I have found that whatever field God has put you in, I don't know where your field is, but if you are truly his today, you will be interested in what I'm talking about today. Why? Because Jesus said, follow me and I will make of you fishers of men. Therefore, you will have a desire for this to be, for you to be. Why? Because he's working it in you. Unless you're really young in your faith, right? So when you begin to see that your life is a field, therefore, our lives are all different. Therefore, a lot of people come underneath our influence. Right? Some of us may be a handful, some of us may be hundreds. I have no idea. But I do know that God puts us in particular places for particular reasons. Sometimes you may be the only light anybody else sees. But your responsibility is not to make a difference in their life, but just to make sure they see and that they understand. So you're going to see kind of how that works today, all right? That's all I really want to share with you today. I just want to share with you a couple of sets of verses. There really aren't any points. Not that this is pointless. All right? But I just want to walk down through the scriptures and point out a few things. Just let it speak to you today. If you're not sure if you do know him today, you'll get a good picture of what it means to know him, because the gospel itself is very simple. All right, who Christ is, what he came to do. And when you begin to see those things, it's a powerful thing. So let's jump into it. In Acts chapter 4 is where we're going to be in just a minute. But I'm going to talk to you for a minute and give you the background. I was going to read Acts chapter 3. But I thought, no, let me just tell you the story, and then we'll read the part in Acts 4 that I want you to see. Now, if you're not familiar with how everything is working here, right, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those are the Gospels, right? That is basically from the time of Jesus' birth, really even John the Baptist, announcement of his birth, all the way through resurrection and his ascension. And then after that, all right, is the book of Acts is about the start of the church. Now, when I say the word church, I'm not talking about denominations. I'm talking about those people that are his, because if you are his, right, if you truly are a believer today, then you have to remember you don't attend church, you are the church, right? It's not a denomination, it's not what people call themselves, it's you. So a city set on a hill is a whole lot of people, right? That's the whole thought there. So good. So chapter 3. So in chapter 1, 2, basically Jesus, in the end of the Gospels, he died, was crucified, buried, resurrected on the third day, and then he appeared to a lot of people for about 40 days. And then a few days after that, he ascended, right? He ascended to the Father. And he told them to go back to Jerusalem and to just wait there until God empowered them to do the task that he was calling them to do. We'll talk about that at the very end, what that task is. But I want you to see that this is what Acts chapter 2 is about, Pentecost. God empowering, right, filling them with his Spirit to be able to do what he's called them to do. It's a great read there through chapter 2. Well, they were empowered and all of that at Pentecost. You can read Acts chapter 2, but in Acts chapter 3, it says that Peter and John, they left to go up to the temple to the hour of prayer, right? Basically the ninth hour, which is 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because at this particular time, we count our day starts at midnight, day at 6 a.m., right? So the ninth hour would be 3 o'clock. So at 3 o'clock, they're heading right to the hour of prayer. And Peter and John are walking up to the temple, right? And there's this crippled guy who'd never walked. And people would bring him out there every day. He was over 40, as we were told. And they bring him out there every day, and they would sit him there, and then he would beg, right? And so Peter and John came up to him and saw him there. And they said, seriously, you can take a look at it. It's all there. I'm just telling you what it says. It says, Peter said, look at me. And so he looked up thinking that they were going to give him something. And Peter said to him, listen, I don't have any gold and I don't have any silver, but what I do have, I'm going to give you. And he just basically said, in the name of Christ, right? Jesus Christ, he says, stand up and walk. And so this was a miracle, right? It was a miracle that happened. I found that there are miracles in the scriptures, but remember this. God doesn't do miracles for a show. Are you hearing me? It's almost today when people talk about them, it's almost a show. But in reality, I want you to know that the greatest miracle in the scriptures is somebody becoming a believer, somebody going from death to life, right? Those, salvation, whatever you want to call it, new creation, that is the greatest miracle. But this miracle was done to give credibility to Peter and John when they were just about to share the message. Because lots of people stand up. I mean, we live in a crazy world. Lots of people stand up and say lots of things. But credibility is given, right? And so that's what happened with Peter and John. And so this guy, imagine a guy who's never walked in his entire life, and he's allowed, he's allowed to walk. And so he's not being quiet. He's making the scene, I'm sure, in the temple at the hour of prayer. Oh no, And so everybody kind of got everybody's attention, but he's not going to shut up. I wouldn't, would you? And so everybody kind of comes up and they say, hey, I know you. You've been sitting there for decades. And then the guy who was, healed, he says, it's those guys. And so they all look at Peter and John. And Peter and John says, listen, why are you looking at us? It wasn't because of us, right? And it wasn't because our piety is, I love that word of how he uses it here. So don't look at us as if we were. He says, and obviously he said it was, and then he began to tell them about who Christ is, right? Who's through his strength and power, and then what he came to do. So he shared the gospel, right? And you're going to find out, we'll find out a little bit later in this chapter, and the first of chapter 4, thousands of people came to know Christ just in this little bit of time. But remember, listen to me. A person doesn't become a believer because they think they've seen a miracle or seen a miracle. Let me tell you what, Jesus even said that those who seek after those things, they'll never truly understand who I am and what I came to do, basically. Why? Because they're seekers after those type things. I have found that those who put their faith and trust in something that might have happened, in reality, that doesn't last very long before you have to see something else happen, right? But when somebody's a believer, they come to know Christ, Scripture says they're a new creation. Things begin to change from the inside out. It's an incredible thing when you begin to see it. So anyway, Peter begins to share and great things happen. Well, every time, and I want you to hear this, so make sure you don't ever become this person. It seems that every time God really begins to work, there's always people that fight against it. And usually, not always, but usually, they're religious people. All right? The ones who fight against God's work the most usually are religious people. In fact, they were in Jesus' day. So there was a big thing going on. God was at work. People were coming to know Christ and lives were being changed. And the chief priests and the elders and the scribes, right, they didn't like it, so they sent the temple guards to arrest Peter and John. Threw them in jail overnight, right? And so what I'm about to tell you in chapter 4 is when they brought them back in and they were going to have a hearing, right? Now, let me set the scene for you because it's really classic, all right? The Sanhedrin was who they stood before, Peter and John. Now, the Sanhedrin were 70 or 72, whichever one you look, and they were men, they were Jewish men, and they were the intellects of their day. Pretty much any one of them would have the equivalent of a couple, maybe 2 or 3 doctoral degrees in our day. They were some of the smartest people, some of the most well-educated people of their day, you know? And so they were basically, the Sanhedrin was your Supreme Court and your Congress all rolled up into one. So when you stood before them, they had tremendous power. Some would say, well, Jeff, what about the Romans? Yeah, well, the Romans, I've told you before about the Romans, you know. The Romans they'd conquered everything. But you have to remember the Roman Empire. They left you alone if you did 2 things. I've told you this many times. I want to tell you one more time. All right, number 1, they left you alone if you behaved yourself. Therefore, no rebellions, right, riots, that kind of thing. All right, something where they didn't have to bring in soldiers to calm it all down. Number 2, if you paid your taxes. All right, if you did those 2 things, they let you rule yourself. So the Sanhedrin ruled the area, right? And so here they come before them. Now, so they basically come up, they all come in, and to me, this is, if you've got a sense of humor, just put yourself here, because you've got these men who thought a whole lot of themselves, right? You know what I'm saying? They thought a whole lot of themselves. They're probably dressed in their Sanhedrin robes, right? And they're walking in with all of their, paraphernalia on their head, and who knows what kind of, how they were adorned, and they all walked in, all rise kind of a thing, and they all walk in and they all sit, they all sit down, and you bring in Peter and John, okay? And so they look at Peter and John, and we're going to start in verse 9, but in verse 7 and 8, they basically ask Peter, okay, how did this happen, right? What happened yesterday, right? And it said in verse 8 that Peter, being filled with God's Spirit, he opens his mouth and he begins to say, all right? And take a look, and look at what he said in verse 9. This is where we'll start reading. And I just want you to know the setting, because it has some real comedy to it if you understand what you're reading. All right, here we go. Peter says this: if we're being examined today concerning a good deed, all right, that was done to a crippled man, right? By what means this man has been healed? Let it be known to all of you and to all of the people of Israel that by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, you understand what he's saying? You remember, this was the group that condemned Christ to be crucified. Same group, only a few weeks earlier. All right? So, and you know, these guys thought that they had done away with this thing. But here comes Peter, and here comes another miracle, right? And they don't know, and they're looking out at him, and notice that he calls him, Nazareth was where Jesus was from, right? But Christ, that means the word Messiah. So in other words, Jesus Christ is just something we always use, but back then the word Christ meant Messiah. That is that he was the one. He was the one that had been foretold down through the ages would come, and you killed him. And you are the guys that are supposed to be the leaders. So this is pretty straightforward stuff. In other words, whom you crucified, all right, but whom God has raised from the dead. By him, this man is standing before you whole or well, right? Now, I have this thought here too. Just put this together, okay? Because Peter and John you'll see it in just a minute, they're just common, ordinary working people, right? And then this beggar, right? He's still got, who knows? He's probably still got all of his old begging clothes on. I have no idea. But he's sitting on the front row with the big smile on his face, right? And so you have this setting. Don't miss this. You have this setting. And then Peter launches into a verse from the Old Testament. You remember, these 72 men were experts. They had their PhDs in theology and all kinds of government and all kinds of things because of what they did. And so they couldn't have been where they were if they weren't. So basically, Peter starts quoting verses to them, and they have them all memorized. And Peter quotes a verse out of Psalm 118 that is a reference to the Christ, the Messiah. And it says that Jesus was the stone that the builders rejected, right? Therefore, this Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you, the builders. So guess what, guys? The prophets not only foretold that Christ was coming, but he also foretold that you'd be the one that would reject him. You see, Peter is not winning friends and influencing people here, is what I'm trying to get across to you. Does that make sense? I mean, he's basically throwing it right in their face, right? And he says that which was rejected has become the cornerstone, right? And then he says in verse 12, and I don't have a whole lot I could spend the whole time just on this verse. And I'm not going to like I did at some of the other services. But in verse 12, there is salvation in no one else. No one else. For there's no other name under heaven given among men by where salvation has come. You see, what Jesus came to do, he was able to do because of who he was. If Jesus wasn't who he says he was, then he had no authority to die for people's sins and to offer them these things. But if he was who he was, he could. So when you understand what's being said here, it's pretty straightforward, right? It's not politically correct. Does that make sense? And I just wanted you to see it for what it said, right? So, verse 13, and when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, they perceived that they were uneducated, common men. They were astonished. So what does that mean? Well, basically, this is classic stuff, right? God had always said throughout the scriptures that God loves to use the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. So probably the smarter you think you are, the greater trouble you have with how God does things, right? Because there's an arrogance that, I don't want to be too ugly because I've had a lot of it myself, but there's an arrogance that comes with tons of education, right? Somehow that we have it all figured out. The great thing that you and I need to remember, all right, especially if you've had lots of degrees, right? Remember this. is that the education 100 years ago, we laugh at it. Does that make sense? We think it's funny. Oh, do you know what they believed 100 years ago? Right? And guess what's going to happen in another 100 years? They're going to laugh at what we think, right? Why? Because the answer is not found in intellect. The answer is found in Christ, right? This is what it's saying, right? These were ignorant. These were uneducated. These were rednecks from Galilee. And here they come in here, no education, and they come in here and they're confounding, right, the smartest people in the room, right, in the country, and they couldn't say anything. This is classic. Listen to this. And they recognized that they had been with Jesus. Oh yeah, you think? Right? But here's the problem. Here's problem number one. Really the only problem. All right, here we go. But seeing the man who was healed standing beside them, there was nothing they could say. Does that make sense? You know, if you wanted to have an argument over theology, then they could have argued with you for weeks. But they had a problem. There was evidence sitting in the room, and he was smiling on the front row, waving at them. Does that make sense? Why? Because they all knew, because they'd all walked by this guy for decades. And now he's walking around, and it's unexplainable. You see, when God works in a person's life, right, it's his work. And everybody around kind of knows, well, God had to do that one because we can't do that one. Therefore, a life change, okay? Life changes the evidence. This man's life had been changed, and if truly our lives have been changed, that's the one thing that you can't argue with, right? If it truly has been changed. Therefore, there was nothing they could say. Why? Because the evidence was sitting right in front of them, right? Right in front of them. You know, when I began to think on those things, I was reading this past week, and I try not to throw a lot of quotes and stuff at you, but there was a favorite of mine. I have several favorites of guys of yesteryear, right? And one of them's name was Leonard Ravenhill. And even if you've never heard of him, listen to what he said. He said, the man with the experience is never at the mercy with the man with the argument. All right, you're going to have to go, oh, tell me that one more time. All right, here we go. All right. The man with the experience, or woman, right, with the experience, is never at the mercy with the person with the argument. Why? Well, I don't think. Well, it really doesn't matter what you think because I saw it. Got it? Well, I just don't think that it could. What? See, the person with the experience, the guy with the better argument can't get to him. Why? Because he's seen it. So if Christ has changed your life, those things don't really matter, right? It's an amazing thought. Why? Because the scriptures teach all over what does it mean to be his. Jesus called it being born again. That is something that wasn't there that is now there. Therefore, Paul called it a new creation. Guys, it is not something that you believe in that's going to happen. It's something that once you put your faith in trust, it's his work in you. And you begin to grow. It's an amazing thing. And then when he changes your life, then you become evidence. You're the person sitting on the front row waving. Right? Seriously, it's an amazing thing when he makes that difference. I don't know. It's incredible when you see it happen here, right? So when they commanded after all that, because they couldn't say anything. Well, I don't believe. Well, what about this guy on the front row? So they knew they were had, but this is classic. All right, verse 15. All right, when they commanded them to leave the council, they conferred with one another. So in other words, okay, remove all of these people, and then they were like, okay, we have to come up with something here, right? And this is what they said. What are we going to do with these guys? For that a notable sign has been performed through them is evident to all the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and we can't deny it. Guys, then why are they trying? Seriously. Why are they trying to deny it? Why don't you just, wow, gosh, that's got to be the truth, right? Because it went against what they wanted. We got a whole host of people today that I'll believe as long as it fits into my little scheme, as long as it fits into what I want, right? Well, that's what they were. They were used to being in charge. They were used to being honored and thought real well of, respected, and all of the rest. And basically, they didn't want to let go of the control they had over the people. Power. And so that was the reason Jesus was killed. And that was the problem they still had. All right? So what are we going to do? Because we can't let this spread among the people anymore, right? All right? So let us tell them that they will not speak anymore in this name. Now you have to remember the day in which they lived. It's not like today, right? The Sanhedrin, when they came up with a verdict or when they came up with, it became law. So they could actually make it against the law for these two guys to say that, even say the name of Jesus, and if we hear you, then whatever, you broke the law and different things. So that's what they did. So they called them in, they charged them that they couldn't speak or teach in the name of Jesus at all. Then Peter and John answered them and said, okay, whether it's right, okay, in the sight of God to listen to you rather than God, you must judge. For we cannot help but speak of what we have both seen and heard, not speak of what we believe. Are you hearing me? You see, we are enamored in this country with what we believe, and we kind of push it out there like, well, I believe. Okay, and I've told you before, and I know it upsets some, but very few, right? I don't care what you believe, right? Because your belief doesn't make it right or wrong. But belief is not a good or bad thing. Faith is not a good or bad thing. It can be good and it can be bad, because faith in the wrong thing can bring massive destruction in your life. Does that make sense? So therefore, it needs to be and has to be based on facts. What's the truth? Right? It just does. And that's what they're saying. At this particular time, they're saying, listen, we're telling you, you can't. This is what we've seen and heard. We're witnesses to this, right? And so this is what he's telling them. And so when they'd further threatened them, they let them go. And they couldn't punish them because the people were all praising God about what had happened, right? So this gets us down to this, this wonderful thought of how it all fits. And what does it mean to be a believer? And what does it mean to share that clearly with other people? Right? I want to share with you one other thing, and then these couple of verses, and I'll be done. But in Matthew chapter 28, this is commonly called the Great Commission. Right? You probably heard it before, but if you haven't, then just listen. This is not just who we are, but this is what we're supposed to be doing as a group. This is why I can say out loud, Jesus said, follow me, I'll make you fishers of men. Therefore, I know you, if you're truly his today, you're going to want to be in on this, right? It's just who he wants us to be. But in Matthew chapter 28, verse 18, Jesus said this to his disciples as he was about to leave them. And this is this kind of last, his last basically thought to them. This is what you need to be about, right? And Jesus said to them, he said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. That is because of who I am, and I was able to do what I came to do. Therefore, I forgiveness of sins, all that goes with that. So therefore, the authority, I have that, Jesus said. And he goes on to say, therefore, go. Therefore refers back to, since I have the authority, all right, I'm giving that to you. And the authority is to go. Now, in reality, it's as you're going. So the picture here is that every one of us have a different sphere of influence. And our responsibility is just to share it in a clear way. Why? Because you and I can't change anybody's life. We need to stop putting pressure on ourselves for that to happen. Why? Our responsibility is to share. Make sure that it's understood, right? And then make sure that we're evidence, right? If you're not living for him, then just keep your mouth shut. Am I making sense? Seriously. Because you try to share and you're not living that way, then they're going to look back at you and say, what do you even mean, right? But if you're his, then light shines and then that becomes the evidence. It's pretty cool when you see how it works, right? It says, go therefore, right? Therefore, and make disciples of all nations. So this changed here. I don't have a lot of time to tell you, but basically up to this point, it had been all about Israel and Israel being the light. But now God's doing something different. And it's called the church, not a denomination, because you are the church. Therefore, it's something he's entrusted to us, is that just to make sure it's understood. Guys, that's what the T-boat thing was all about, right? That's what we've been doing. Giving people the opportunity to hear and to understand. By the way, Tim did a fantastic job at just a clear presentation of what the gospel is. And by the way, just in case you want to know, because I had some time to spend with him, he is just an ordinary, average, just a great missionary son. And it truly is in his heart and on his heart to just share that with as many people as long as God gives him the platform to do it. Why? Because he says, right, it's not about him, right? Not about him. Go therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit. Now, a lot of people think of water baptism there, and that might be what that's referring to. But you have to remember, water baptism is a symbol. The greater symbol is being in Christ, immersed, being in him. Does that make sense? The word Christian, right, means being in Christ. So that is those who are actually in him, right? Well, I believe, and in reality, you're his, right? And therefore, he's changed you, and therefore, you're in him. And so there's this great picture. Baptism is just a picture of being in him, right? Why? Because when you're under the water in that picture, you're immersed by the water, right? It surrounds you. You're enveloped in it, I guess, is the picture. But that's just the picture. But as most of the time, humans are real bad about making the symbols the reality, and then they worship the symbols, right? But anyway, baptizing them in the Father, Son. Then he goes on to say, our next job is to teach those who have come to know him, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you, and then promise. Promise number one, right? That as you do this, I promise I'll always be with you. Well, Jeff, you think he was just talking to them? No, well, look at the rest of the statement. Even to what? To the end of the age. That is, to the end of this time, right? Anybody who attempts, anybody who is part of this, I'm going to be with them. So, guys, this is the reason. This is the reason we're doing what we're doing. Why? Because we're attempting to do what he's called us to do. Therefore, that's why a few weeks ago, it's been over a month now, just how to start praying for people, right? And we talked about this, and if you want to go, on the website, there's a little video I did that explains what we're doing, so I wouldn't have to keep explaining it in here. So if you want to know what it means, we just have been putting people's names down and just start praying for them. Now, these are people in your life, right? Because if God's put them on your heart, then those are the ones to pray for them, because they're the ones that are around you, right? And so, I don't know, it's an amazing thing, just kind of what I've heard from those who've been doing it. And just praying for them, because I've learned through the years a lot about prayer, and prayer does make a difference in what you're praying for, but I think the bigger difference is made in you. Anybody who spends time in prayer, it's amazing how it changes you, right? You may be praying for God to change a situation or change this or change that, but more than likely he's going to change you. Who knows, he might change the situation, but that's rare. Just look at the scriptures, right? And what happens is when you start praying for people, right, especially to come to know Christ, which, by the way, if somebody is praying for you, it is the greatest honor that we can bestow on anyone. Does that make sense? If we pray for you to come to know him, that is the highest That is the highest form of love that we can convey and who we are, if that makes sense to you. But as you pray for people, it's amazing what God puts in your mind. I don't know, it's an amazing thing to me. So what we've been doing, all right, we've been praying, right? We've been praying for people in our life now for several months. And I'm gonna, and you can share with them, right, if you feel confident. If not, bring them to some of the things that we know that people, see, our responsibility is just make sure they understand, right? Just make sure they understand. It's a powerful thing. Therefore, Tebow did a great job. We got several more of these throughout the rest of the year, right? We have Lecrae coming Thursday night, right, of Jamboree, right? And if you don't know who that is, then listen to their music online before you buy a ticket. All right, you hear me? Seriously. It's going to be if you're a younger crowd, but it doesn't mean it's only for, all right? It's its own, but he's got solid lyrics, and he's really, it's going to be a great night. So if you have people in your life that don't know who Christ is, it'd be a great one if that fits you. And then on Friday night, we're going to have the McMillans come, right? David and Susie, and do the country thing. That's going to reach a whole nother set of people, right? Probably all those who wouldn't go to the Lecrae would probably go to this one, right? All right, seriously. I mean, why do we do these things? Just to give people the opportunity. Listen to me. I wouldn't force anybody or put pressure on anybody, because if you can pressure them into something, then somebody else can pressure them out of it. Our responsibility is just make sure they hear and understand, right? It's how he works. So we're going to be doing some of these. We have the Christmas musical, right? It's the biggest event we do here. Our musicians up here that do all this, they have a big Christmas musical, and we have to have 3 services. I think there were over 5,000 people at that last year. But I was one, right? I was a lost person at the age of 20, 21. Somebody invited me to go to a Christmas musical. Y'all know me, I can't sing and don't even know much about music, but I went to a Christmas musical, and that's what God did. You never know what he's going to do. It's incredible. Then Christmas Eve, I'm going to make sure that in all of those, there's a good solid, 8 to 10 minutes where the gospel is just explained in a real clear way, right? And so that's what we're doing, right? That's what we have been doing. But it kind of is cool with this past Sunday night, right? Lots of neat things happen, right? We couldn't get a total number of folks, but well over 100 people stood up, which was pretty powerful when you stand, It's different, but when they all stand. So, and then I had a whole flood of people who came and talked to me, and that was lots of fun. But one that came and talked to me, I decided to put it on a video. And this is just someone that, I don't know, this is kind of cool. Just let you see kind of what we're talking about and what this looks like. All right, go ahead and show them this video.
Hi, my name is Michelle, and this is my Night of Hope story. When Pastor Jeff originally announced Whatever It Takes, and we downloaded the screensaver, I immediately put my brother, Chip, and my nephew, Tyler, as my number 1 and number 2 people that I was praying for. When it was announced that we would be hosting the Night of Hope here at our church with Tim Tebow, I got super excited thinking, well, maybe this is the one chance that I'll be able to get them to actually come to church. So I prayed about it, and I knew Pastor Jeff was praying for everyone and all the people on everyone's list as well. And before I invited them, I prayed some more and asked them to come, and they accepted the invitation. So I was super excited about that, of course. And so they came Sunday night to the Night of Hope. They got here early. They were excited to be here and got a good seat. And when Tim gave the invitation, my brother Chip and my nephew Tyler both accepted Christ. We truly serve an awesome God, and I am so grateful that he answers our prayers.
Okay, so that just kind of gives you the picture of what we're doing, But I was just as excited. I had a lot stand. When I stood up here, I said, if anybody wants to come talk to me, and of course I had several of you that brought people up to me, and one in particular I remember, this is a friend of mine, and he said, he said, yeah, he looked at me and he said, I gave my life to Christ tonight. He kind of reminded me of the guy sitting on the front row in the Sanhedrin who'd been the lame guy smiling and waving. And because he was just so excited, because it was obvious that God let him see some neat things. And so I had several of those. I also had several that came to me and said that I've been praying and I asked and they came, but they didn't. But guys, that doesn't matter. What matters is that we share with them all, because listen, you never know what God's going to do. You know, in Jesus' parable, the sower and the soils, remember that there is a delay between the time the seed is planted until when it produces fruit. Am I making sense? And it's a time of growth, but it's not a believer yet, but it's a growing thing, right? Producing fruit is what it is. Billy Graham used to put it this way. He could always do it so cool. He'd say there's a time of conception, and then there's a time of gestation, and then there's a time of, anybody know what I'm talking about? Do I need to start going into all that? What conception and gestation? All right, birth. Right? Birth, right? It's that Jesus' metaphor of being born again. Therefore, it's an interesting thing, right? It was the same with me. When I went to a Christmas program, I met somebody there that I'd known from high school. She asked me to come to church. I went with her, and I got curious. It wasn't quick, but I started coming. I got curious, and about 4 months later, right? Because my stage of life at that time, I was pretty hard-hearted, and it took me a while to thaw out a little bit, right? And so you never know what or how God's going to do. See, our job is just to fish. Our job is just to make sure people hear and give plenty of people opportunities to hear. We don't want anything from them, right? We're not pressuring them at all. Please don't pressure anybody, right? But we just want them to know, right? And who knows when seed's planted, how God will use it. And that to me is the greatest thrill of what we do. Why? Because we're dependent on him. That's why prayer is such an incredible part of the process. So the greatest thing you can do right now, if you're a believer here today, is to start praying. If you haven't started doing that, get you a little thing and just start praying for them. That's what makes the phone thing so cool. You know, you can send it in. We send the wallpaper back. And I've been out, you know, and seen our folks, right? And they show you their phone, or their phone comes on and you see their little list there. And for a lot of them, it's just initials, you know, TMG, you know, they don't put the whole name on there, just an initial. But every time it comes up, you know, Lord, I just pray for John today. I pray for Mary. I pray for Brian, whoever it might be that you're praying for in your life. And then watch God work. It's an amazing thing, and it's an exciting thing. So this is what we're going to be doing. Just wanted you to know a little bit more today, of a little more of what we're doing and why we're doing it. Why? The biggest reason we are is because that's what he's called us to do, right? That's one of our great purposes. So if you look back at the statement, the vision statement, can you put it back up there if y'all can find it, right? Whatever it takes, right? Doing whatever it takes, right? To help all people of all ages understand, right? The life-changing message of the gospel, right? Just understand. Why do we put understand in there? Because I'm convinced personally, like me growing up, that a lot of times the gospel most people reject is not even the true gospel. It's the man-made religious version that's in the way so that nobody can really understand, right? Just understand. What does it say? It's cool stuff.